Okay, welcome to Critical Omissions. This is Topical Tuesday night, and we're going to cover some very dark topics tonight that are, of course, necessary to cover. They're part of the dark territory that has been exposed and mapped consistently by Douglas Dietrich at the great personal sacrifice of his family, his career, and, of course, as one of the few people who has done all of that and remained out of prison and out of exile. I am the most dangerous man either side of the Pacific, and in some very real senses, the world. So I am here to continue the danger and present it to you in as articulate a matter as possible. In the meantime, let's get some more mundane little, shall we say, things out of the way, like wishing people happy birthday. We have, of course, a wonderful hostess on Revolution Radio by the name of Mona Radler. So I do want to say happy birthday, Mona Radler. A happy birthday to her. And I also want to bring attention to the fact that today is Teacher's Day. So a happy Teacher's Day to two of the most wonderful golden educators that I know, Mr. Robert Lacey and his adult supervision, his wife, Sheila Lacey. And the both of them, of course, have provided me the equipment with which I'm speaking to you right now. I would not be on the bandwidth right now were it not for Robert and Sheila Lacey, our golden educators. And of course, we have Mother's Day coming up. And so a happy shout out to all of our mothers, our co-producer across the Pacific, our volcano crowned correspondent, the princess of the Hawaiian Isles in her own right, Judith Ager. And of course, we've got Deanne Lapierre, a wonderful mother on her own, who is going to appear sometime in the near future as well. And it'll probably be on the same night that we actually have our Saturday Taiwan Megwa, our Taiwanese American cultural festival here in San Francisco, Saturday the 14th. I will be back in time for that presentation for the evening, and I may not be entirely sober, but I will be here for that, barring any extenuating circumstances, in which case, of course, I will fall back on my executrix producer, Laura Lee Solomon, without whom none of this would be possible. She does all of the work, and without her, I would not be on air either, would certainly not be able to function. So my love unto her as well, and definitely with that we can get started on to what might seem disparate topics. Everybody has been asking about the Chochoa. We will get to those tonight in a manner that is tangentially connected, though pivotally so, to our subject matter at hand, which people have also been obsessing about on and off for quite some time, which is the dark theory. And by that, I'm going to take it in a direction of which most people will not find immediately evident or discernible. And that is, of course, the child molestation and pedophilia subject, which is inescapable when we come to the United States military and its evil empire extended across the globe. Now, aside from all of that, of course, we do want to bring to people's attention the fact that I have placed a link on my timeline on Facebook for people to access at their convenience, certainly not while I'm on air, concerning Pearl Harbor and the genuine hidden history behind Pearl Harbor. This is the history I would have provided had I not been denied airtime by Coast to Coast AM, which brought me on for a limited time of about 45 minutes, well before the Pearl Harbor anniversary date. And when they did so, of course, George Noy had every intention of nobody listening that night concerning Pearl Harbor, because Pearl Harbor, people tune in to hear about Pearl Harbor on December 7th in the Western Hemisphere. They do not tune in on December 5th or 6th or whatever day we had that, which was quite a while before December 7th. So I believe it was something like December 4th or something like that. Literally, it was on my mother's birthday eve day, her birth date, of course, being December 5th. And we had, of course, the Mother's Day coming up in my dwelling on my late and sainted mother. I'll try and think of some kind of fitting presentation if I'm not just overwhelmed with grief or sadness that particular day to present anything at all on my Facebook timeline. So do keep an eye out for that as we approach that particular date as well. But we got a lot going on this month. But when it came to Coast to Coast AM, when I was invited on for that particular piece of time, I was, of course, discredited by putting myself in front of Stephen Quayle, who is, of course, someone who quite blatantly and openly claims that he speaks directly to God, that God talks directly into his head. This is, of course, called the Voice of God technology. And this was developed by the co-religionists of Colonel Michelangelo Aquino, Colonel John Alexander. And it's a so-called non-lethal weapons technology, which is meant to drive men mad by direct beaming into their skull, or basically a sub-audial beam which goes into the eardrum or is received by the inner ear, that only the recipient can hear when it's beamed on them. That gives them the impression that they are being spoken to, or hearing voices in their head. Most people, of course, who are psychotic to begin with, automatically interpret this as the divinity himself, itself, herself, speaking through them. And one of those psychotics is Stephen Quayle. So Stephen Quayle, of course, is quite blatant, quite open about this, which is why he's back on and on again on Coast to Coast AM. Now, what was so offensive about this, truly offensive, was that he basically stole all of my work, which, of course, it is incontrovertible, inarguable that I brought up first through Nexus Magazine of Australia. This was such a monumental exposition concerning Unterland, or the lands below, the Reich as reestablished in exile within massive caverns within the crust of our planet, deep down, but not that deep down. We're not talking about a hollow earth. We're not talking about a core. We're speaking of reality and skeins of cavernous tunnels that, of course, are extant throughout our planet. And basically, we have a situation in which the Third Reich, at the 1945 period of time, relocated itself within those caverns. Now, all of this, of course, was predominantly through the Antarctic region. Now, this is something that I exposed through Nexus Magazine. I paid a horrible price for that. Nexus Magazine, of course, set up an ambush with my former managers, Lorien Ann Fenton, where I was brought down to Australia. And, of course, everything I had was stolen. Everything. I mean, because I was down there for 17 days. I was told to go down there for 17 days. Had I not brought Noreen Helpand with myself as a companion, they insisted on my going alone. I would never have gotten back. She was the reason that I did get back. We basically plopped her into a wheelchair, which I stole from Virgin Australia, and have no compunctions about admitting such, because Virgin Australia, of course, stole everything of mine, and which has never been returned. And whatever compensatory money was paid towards that was stolen by Lorien Ann Fenton. So obviously, I lost everything with no compensation through that fiasco, and which was intended to have me down there forever, basically as a homeless person, which is what Australia is seething with. When I was down in Australia, I have never on earth seen such a massive homeless problem of disenfranchised people outside of San Francisco. It was monstrous, the level of unemployment and poverty that I saw in Australia. It is a third world nation along with the United States, predominantly because it's indirectly, or rather directly, occupied by the United States for all intents and purposes. So the economy, of course, extends itself there. You're talking about a welfare state where people are seeking employment outside of the country, as many people are forced to do in the United States. So we have that entire situation that occurred with that. And when I plopped her into a wheelchair, the last thing they wanted was a handicapped or disabled person under care of their welfare state in Australia. And at that point, I ceased to exist other than as a wheelchair pusher, as an automaton. And that was how we were able to narrowly escape out of Australia. I had been totally erased from their records in terms of Virgin Australia's ticket system. And even then, we barely escaped because the plane was, of course, basically canceled in flight because they felt that there was something terribly wrong with its engines, which had never occurred before in many airlines. It's very seldom that a pilot will cancel a flight immediately before a flight because he's afraid to fly. That's almost unheard of. It happens, but statistically, it almost never happens. It certainly happened with us. And on the way home, of course, my other plane, which was, of course, Southwest Airlines, almost crashed. We were dumping fuel. The stewardess had to personally was a steward. It was a male, of course, and he had to go back and lower the wheel, and that was something that had to be physically done because they could not lower the wheels mechanically. We were at the point where we were circling the San Francisco Greater Bay Area for well over hours, just dumping fuel literally into the bay because they were preparing to crash land into the bay. And so every aspect of that so-called trip down there was sabotaged and meant to either keep me down there forever as a homeless person or in prison. It's very important to remember whatever you're accused of in any nation outside of the United States, proportionately, meaning that the norm is you're guilty until proven innocent. So if someone accuses you of something in a foreign nation, Europe, Australasia, you will go to jail and you will rot in jail until potentially you will be released on trial. And these hearings can take years and years and years. People will be sitting in jail for years awaiting their hearings and their trials, let alone ever being set free. So the entire intention was, of course, to get rid of myself forever. Now, why was all of this done? A lot of it has to do with what I expose about the Second World War. That's why, of course, George Norrie, as a former sailor, feels enough guilt as someone who was a spin doctor for the United States Navy for years that even though he still has the same boss, who was his former admiral in the Navy, Bobby Ray Inman, surname spelled I-N-M-A-N. Bobby Ray Inman was, of course, an admiral in the United States Navy. George Norrie answered directly to him as a spin doctor, a public relations officer for nigh a decade, 9 years, during which time, in exchange for never seeing combat, George Norrie had to, of course, spin all incidents and accidents that occurred in the Navy in the most positive light. And he still works for Bobby Ray Inman. Bobby Ray Inman is, of course, now in charge of the National Security Agency. His employees include not just George Norrie, but also Michael Angelo Aquino, who laterally transferred after he could no longer rise in promotion in the United States Army due to all of the scandals involved with the child molestation, mass child molestation that went down at the Child Daycare Center at the Presidio Military Base, for which scandal his name is still top on the suspects list for the Criminal Investigations Division of the United States Army, the USACID, the CID, or Criminal Investigations Division. He sued to get his name removed. It was never removed. And, of course, because of that, he could be granted no further public promotions within the United States Army. So he laterally transferred as an intelligence officer into civilian intelligence, the National Security Agency, in which he is now a deputy director. And that, of course, is similar in terms of rank bureaucratically in the federal government as a supergrade, the bureaucratic equivalent of a United States Army general. So he is now, for all intents and purposes, an NSA general, functionally. So we're talking about somebody with enormous resources. And, of course, it was during the case of the Pearl Harbor fiasco on Coast to Coast AM, where they brought me on well before Pearl Harbor anniversary date itself, gave me very little time to speak, 45 minutes when you get the opening hour. They have crypto news, they have commercials. You are left with about 40 minutes, really. And so I spoke to what I could, and then they followed me up with Steve Quayle. And that, of course, discredited everything I said, and all he talked about was the Ice Reich, the National Socialistes in Antarctica, only he brought it up from his own insane, deranged perspective as beamed directly into his brain from Langley, Virginia. And, of course, that served to discredit the entire topic, not just Pearl Harbor, but the topic itself of the Ice Reich in Antarctica. So I have a column in which I have covered the Ice Reich in Antarctica very thoroughly in text, and that column is up on my Facebook timelines now. So I do encourage people to become a member of Facebook, friend myself, and you can ask such columns via my personal friends page, but much more conveniently, you can access them readily and handily at the top of the timeline when you go to my public community fan page. And that's facebook.com/Douglas Duane Dietrich. Douglas spelled with one S. Duane is spelled D-U-A-N-E. Dietrich, of course, you just put the words diet and rich together. I used to bring up Marlena Dietrich as my relation. And, of course, most people these days who are too young to remember who she is, sadly. So when you go to facebook.com/Douglas Duane Dietrich, make certain you put a like on it so that I do not have to pay to maintain that page, and that will help immensely. And scroll down and you'll access the column on the Ice Reich in Antarctica. It will be within the Pearl Harbor link to some audio files from December 7th of last year. I was on the Queen of Hearts show, and we spoke of Pearl Harbor. And at the time, she had wanted to speak of Dark Fury, and we're going to speak of that now in a very real sense. So one of the things that we will dump into the chat room right now is a map of Japan. It was the proposed occupation zones of Japan. Japan is divided between China and, of course, the United States and the Soviet Union and Britain. And there are international zones on this map. Now, keep in mind, when you look at this map, the proposed divisions of Japan, where it's divided as the Third Reich was divided, or more specifically, since the Third Reich it was inclusive of multiple nation states, we are speaking of Greater Germany or Großgermania within the Deutschen Sprach, or the German speak. And Großgermania is it's divided in 1945 by the quote-unquote victorious Allied powers in the midst of a ceasefire on the European continent that was reached in 1945. Now, it's incredibly important to remember that a ceasefire is not a surrender. All that could be done was all that could be surrendered was the armies in the field by military commanders. The Third Reich never surrendered because the elite that was captured in captivity, such as Hermann Goering, Gross Admiral Karl Dönitz, Albert Speer, these various members of the Third Reich hierarchy were pan-European in nature. These were people who had representatives from all over Europe. It wasn't just Germany itself. And of course, when they were quote-unquote put on trial, they were not recognized as a legitimate government by the Allies. And as a result, no surrender was taken. They were instead tried as criminals. So there was no peace between nations. That this is why, desperately, in September 12th of 1990, remember that the Berlin Wall fell in 1989? Well, it wasn't until about 2 years later that in September 12th of 1990, the United States, the Soviet Union, France, and Greater Britain concluded a peace treaty with West Germany, the German Federal Republic, the GDR, and they also included a German Democratic Republic. That would be the GDR. The Federal Republic of Germany was, of course, the FRG. Both of these were included in this peace treaty that they signed finally on September 12th of 1990. Now, the German Democratic Republic, of course, was just about to go out of business. It was being literally purchased in terms of its property and its industry. It was East Germany. It was being purchased for pfennigs on the dollar. By the Deutschmark, using the Deutschmark at that time, to buy it up by West Germany. So they literally purchased the eastern half of Germany back from the Soviet Union, which itself was about to collapse. And all of this was signed illegally because neither one of these nations, West Germany or East Germany, the German Democratic Republic or the German Federal Republic, the Bundesrepublik Deutschland, correctly in the Deutschen Sprach, which I always think of it in, is BRD. Neither one of these were legitimate governments. These were occupation governments set up by the Allies in ceasefire, under conditions of ceasefire, in an ongoing war, which is still extant with the Third Reich. So it is the same condition which exists between North Korea and South Korea, where they are still legally at war. It is the same condition with Taiwan, the nation in which I was born. We're going to have a Taiwanese American cultural festival in San Francisco just this month, within a few days, pending. The Taiwanese American Cultural Festival will be on April 14th. And a Saturday, people are welcome to come to San Francisco to enjoy that if they wish to do so. And it is still of a culture, it's representative of a culture which is still legitimately, legally at war with communist China on the mainland, which means we are at war with you, which is what makes this an enemy transmission, which is why, of course, we were allied with Japan, was because your nation state, your allies, the Soviet Union, betrayed us and supported the communists through the Great Communist Chinese Civil War. That's why Communist China was placed into the Security Council seat in the United Nations, as opposed to my nation, the Nationalist Republic of China, which, of course, was one of the originators, one of the founding nation states of your United Nations. So we were the first to fire a shot against any Axis nation. Before any Axis nation went to war, Japan had invaded China and was absorbing Manchuria. So at that period of time in 1931, prior to even the Jews declaring war on Germany, and you can look that up, Judea declares war on Germany. That occurred in 1933, as soon as Adolf Hitler assumed power. That put the Reich on a war footing from the very beginning, involuntarily, due to external pressures to instill sanctions that would destroy the Third Reich before it even became the Third Reich. The reality was it was the German Democratic Republic. It was the Democratic Republic of Germany, in which Adolf Hitler was legally and democratically elected into coalition government as chancellor. He was simply chancellor in coalition with the conservative government. He held seats in parliament. He was like Angela Merkel. Now, all of that had to end when the Jews declared war on Germany, and he had to go on a war footing, at which point he became Reichskanzler. That's where it went from republic to Reich. It was not a Reich when Hitler was elected. Reich was an empire state in response of national mobilization to Jewish declaration of war and sanctions, using their puppet nations, Britain and the United States, to choke off Germany. This is what the Allies were also doing to Japan prior to the war, as explained in my Pearl Harbor presentation available on my timeline. Now, of course, what was the end result of this? When the National Socialist government retreated beneath the earth, literally underground, then other governments that were allied to it out of necessity because of our betrayal by the Allies, such as Nationalist China, stayed above ground on nations like the islands of Taiwan, which are not recognized as being governed by any legitimate government per the United Nations. We are not a recognized government, even though the overwhelming majority of computer hardware on planet Earth comes from Taiwan. Were, God forbid, something to happen to the 30 million people who live on the 100 islands of Taiwan, all of your computer systems throughout Russia, the United States, and the developed world would crash within a very short period of time for lack of parts to replace hardware that was wearing out. All of that comes in a never-ending stream from Taiwan. The information technology highway begins in Taiwan. And yet, despite this incredible economy that for many decades, half a century, was larger than that of all of communist China, we're not recognized as existing or extant. It is the same with the 1,000-year Reich in exile. So you have these legitimate states of war between my nation state and yourself, between the Third Reich and yourself. Now, Japan, in the midst of, quote unquote, what the Americans and Soviets claimed, winning a war, was supposed to be divided. And in the map that's provided in the chat room, no Japanese were supposed to be left alive. And according, of course, to all of the American shall we say, surveys that were taken by the Office of War Information, which I have brought up in the past repeatedly concerning the race war between the United States and Japan. When it comes to the war as a race war, everybody who was interviewed in the United States Army, a great majority of them said that there would be no peace until every single Japanese person was dead. So we had a race war in which every intent was there to kill every single Japanese person alive. That was something that was also stated by the over a quarter, basically 27% of the American population on the home front that was interviewed. This was a war to the racial death. Now, what was the result of this declaration of racial war? That was the officially articulated platform of the United States military machine. And, of course, it's public back home that was paying all the taxes for it. The very official objective was the extermination of the Japanese people and the reoccupation of Japan by entirely different cultures. The former Soviet Union, the United States, Britain, and their erstwhile ally China, who they soon betrayed. This was a key point of their defeat. One of the things that the Chinese nationalists did was they allowed the Japanese to remain in China, maintain their bases, and therefore the emperor would relocate to China in the event of an all-out Allied invasion of the home islands, were that to go sour for the Japanese. Now, it never took place because the Soviets were begged on bended knee by, of course, Harry Truman to invade northern Japan, and they lost. Now, you will hear an incredible amount of misinformation that is obtuse and obscured concerning the Soviet invasion of Manchuria. Basically, Emperor Hirohito took all the heavy armored units, the only heavy armored units that Japan fielded, out of Manchuria, as well as the top Kwangtung Army division out of Manchuria, and relocated them onto the plain surrounding Tokyo. And when he did this to lure Stalin in. So Stalin knew that Manchuria was open, and he was drawn into the trap. He blitzed through Manchuria, through the Manchurian forces, and then entered Korea, which was a death trap, where, of course, the Japanese blew their atomic ordnance, which literally atomized, disintegrated the Soviet advance. That created the largest demilitarized zone on the face of the earth, the only man-made object visible by the naked eye through a faceplate, of course, from the moon, aside from the Great Wall of China. And we've gone over this again. Anyone who says you can't see the Great Wall of China from space is, of course, a delusional liar, because you can see it from satellite photographs when you're on Chinese internet. When you're on an American internet and you look it up on Google Maps, you can't see it because it's literally blotted out. And what you're seeing, of course, because of the tremendous amount of air pollution in China, when you're flying at several thousand feet, you cannot see it because of the air pollution, because it's made up of the same materials as the Earth. Therefore, it's the same color as dirt, the Earth itself. And of course, these earthenworks are not visible through all of the pollutants that are between yourself and, of course, the Great Wall, due to China's massive industrialization as the most industrialized nation on Earth at this point in history. So you can't see it from the sky. You can see it from space because you see its shadow. Its shadow is what you see. It's the same with the demilitarized zone, which is miles and miles wide and forms the largest nature preserve on Earth for Asian tigers, Asian cranes, other thousands of species that would otherwise be extinct. These were created by the Japanese bomb blasts, which, of course, were clean bombs. These are bombs which emitted radiation collateral to their explosion. These were little boy bombs, like what was used at Hiroshima. And the Hiroshima has no radiation that you're going to be able to ascertain in this day and age. It's a thriving city that is radioactively clean, other than what's emitting from microwaves, various broadcast stations, etc. You're not going to find atomic bomb radiation in Hiroshima. It's the same with the demilitarized zone in Korea. Now, all of this, of course, paled to the Russian defeat when it entered the Shimushu Island zone, trying to invade northern Japanese frontier island of Hokkaido, a major Japanese island, the northernmost island, large place that is considered their frontier zone. And what happened, of course, that Russia was already very short of manpower. It needs to be remembered that, of course, Stalin himself told the Soviet generals, even though they were flush with Lend-Lease equipment and their own war production, they were just gorged on American sponsorship and support, free oil flowing from America. They were at the bottom of their manpower barrel. Anyone who tells you otherwise is lying to your face. In the final assault on Berlin in 1945, Stalin informed flatly Zhukov and Konev, he told them with no uncertain terms, there were no replacements. And you've had this immensely difficult situation in the Soviet Union that they basically had no capability of defeating anyone. They had no ability to sustain a long-term conflict. Their entire logistical train was American manufactured trucks. The cessation of Lend-Lease would have severed this entire support line. It would have created incredible maintenance problems. 1/3 of the German trucks broke down in the first 2 weeks of invading Russia itself in 1941 in Operation Barbarossa. And unlike the Germans, you just basically have a peasant culture
with a proletarian industrial base that was non-corporate in structure. And because of that, the Soviet Union could not immediately manufacture their own trucks. We're talking about years before they would even blow their first atomic bomb, which was well after the Roswell incident in 1947. It didn't take place until 1949. So, yeah, and this was with American hemorrhaging of atomic bomb intelligence. So you've got, of course, the fact that the Soviet Union had no naval power. They had no ability to defend their coastlines. And basically, they had no amphibious forces on the level that the Americans had throughout the Pacific. So you've had all of these serious losses that have taken place. So all the men who invaded Manchuria were old men. They were so old, they were cavalry from World War I. These were World War I veterans who blitzed through Manchuria on cavalry using Cossack sabers. If you don't believe me, look at the footage. Look at the Russian invasion of Manchuria, August Storm, and you take a look at that whole invasion that took place on YouTube. You're going to see Russian Cossacks waving machetes, sabers, and they're on horseback, and they're blitzing their way through Manchuria. Okay, when these same people were trying to invade Japan itself, they were annihilated. It was called the Battle of Shimushu. The Battle of Shimushu is, of course, a climactic battle that you've never heard of, in which the Russian amphibious forces were devastated. They never made it to Hokkaido. So when they got to their point of Shimushu Islands within the Tsushima Island chain, what the Americans call the Kurilsk Islands. This basically was their last stepping stone to hit the mainland, and they were entirely annihilated by Japanese naval units using amphibious tanks. So this is why the Soviets couldn't invade, the Americans couldn't invade. This division of Japan was never realized, and that's why you have Donald Trump today. We're going to drop a link into the YouTube now. Donald Trump is on YouTube saying, "We have never beaten Japan. We have never beaten Japan at anything. We have never beaten Japan at anything." And because he's at that level of economics where he is exposed to the realities of trade and military logistics, where even though his wealth was based on brand naming and basically selling brand, even though his wealth is based on that, he is at the level now where he wants to be president. And because he wants to be president, he has been studying our history, and he has basically realized at his level of strategic oversight, because he has been looking at this with the level of big think that he's used to, he realizes who won the war. And that's why he says, when have we ever beaten Japan at anything? So you have someone who is, of course, basically verifying everything that I'm saying. And that brings us, of course, to the war after it was lost by the United States and the Soviet Union. You have a lot of bitter people. And all of these bitter people are not the leaders who, it's more the public. It is the Soviet public that says, oh, we took all these old men at the end of World War II and we brought them over into Manchuria. We defeated a 1,000,000-man army. And of course, this is what they're riding high off of. And they totally neglect to bring up, oh, and by the way, then our T-34s, which are considered so hot roddish and sexy by the Americans, that once we got into the mountain chains of Korea, it's like driving a Ferrari or a Lamborghini, actually more like a Formula 500. It would be like taking a Formula 500 race car and suddenly trying to take it off-road, at which point it is useless. That is what the T-34 tank is outside of the plains of the Volga, outside of the Kazakh steppes and the Kyrgyzia region, where you have nothing but Mongol hordes that have been trampling for years. You could roller skate across places like that. These are the plains of Pola, and Polska, of course, is just one straight flatland between Germany and Russia that's open for invasion, even if you're all on skateboards. Okay, now once you get these into the heavy congested areas of Western Europe, or the Korean Peninsula, the T-34 ceases to function. It becomes a immobile target. That's exactly what happened to them. That's exactly what Hirohito drew the Soviets into, plus their amphibious invasion, which was, of course, abortive for all the reasons I just articulated. So then you have the reality that the Japanese won the war. This is just one factor of that reality, and there are multiple factors that I've gone into at great length and we'll have to go into again in the very near future. And what this leads, of course, is how the public rationalizes it. So you've got the rationalization of the former Soviet peoples, the collective peoples, now, of course, several different republics, and then you've got the rationalization of the Americans. Now, that brings us to the Vietnam War that took place after. So you have the Americans who lost to Japan. Then the Americans are trying to maintain fronts, and they're maintaining fronts in the great civil war between the United Nations. Just as I said, we've got to rethink the context of the civil war between the states in the United States as the American war between the nations, the two separate nations of the Confederate States of America and the United States of America. That we come to a point that we realize that the Confederate States of America is an occupied nation of the United States at this point in history. Then we come to the fact that we had the United Nations, which, of course, my nation is not a part of, is not recognized by, and the United Nations began to fight among themselves. That is a civil war among United Nations, as was interpreted as a civil war between the states on the North American continent. So this civil war between the United Nations commenced directly after the ceasefire with the Axis, directly after Japanese victory. The Japanese fought World War II to victory. The Americans surrendered and opened their markets to Japanese products in 1952, when the Japanese-American Peace Treaty went into effect on August 28th, the Emperor Hirohito's birthday, Eve Day. And so you have this reality of this victory. In the Third Reich's case, that war is still extant. And, of course, that's why they bring on shills like Steve Quayle to say all kinds of nonsense about that war so that it discredits everything I've exposed about it incontrovertibly and in print, the links of which are in the column on my Facebook timeline, well before he read those and then reiterated them, regurgitated them with the twist provided by the voices in his head. Now, directly beamed by Colonel John Alexander's developed technology from Michael Aquino. Now, of course, we've got people who are dealing with the aftermath of the conflicts that occurred in the Civil War between the United Nations, what Americans call the Cold War. So that's a good term for it as well. So the Cold War, the Civil War between the United Nations, between the collectivist economies and, of course, the economy of the United States, which, of course, almost went to war against its other allies in the West, France and England and Israel, during the Middle East crisis on the seizure by Gamal Abdel Nasser of the Suez Canal. And during the Suez Canal crisis, that's when America's Sixth Fleet was in the Mediterranean and ready to go up against its former allies, France, England, and Israel. At that moment, the United Nations collapsed as a united front allied against the combined axis of nations and began a civil war amongst itself. So this is a global civil war when you think of the Cold War between all of the allies. Criminals have no honor. There is no honor among thieves, and they all quickly fell against each other. Now, in the midst of the civil war between the United Nations, we had a subsection of it, a front, just as the Korean War was a front. We had the front of Indochine, of Vietnam. And on that massive front in Vietnam, where the Americans lost, we had ultimately the emergence in the United States, in North America, in Canada as well, of the Chochoa phenomenon. This, what are a minority species of humanoid that are viewed as dark fairy by the peoples of East Asia. And of course, I was invited to speak about those. Our good friend Justin White, shout out to him, on Facebook, was kind enough to write a column on the Chochoa, and that column is now going to be dumped into the chat room as a text, and the Inner Sights link that went with it. We're also going to dump a screenshot. We're going to dump three things right now. The Justin White text on Curse the Night, Space Invaders, and Cry for the Children, the Inner Sights link, that is what Justin White was referencing, which was an interview by myself by James Arthur Yanchik, in which he spoke to me of the Chochoa, and that provided context for the invasions of night space, of his dream space, of his aether space, of his personal space that Justin White was experiencing, and it contextualized it for him so that he didn't drop into the mania of alien worship on the basis of this dream invasive dreamscape phenomena that Whitley Strieber dropped into. And Whitley Strieber, of course, said it was all aliens, which is exactly what he was contracted to say by the United States government. That's why he was on Coast to Coast AM. Just like, of course, our boy who is hearing voices from God, Steve Quayle. So that's why you had for years and years Whitley Strieber on Coast to Coast AM, speaking for millions of people. All this under the orders of Bobby Ray Inman, the admiral who is also a Federal Reservist, was in charge of the branch of the Federal Reserve in the state of Texas for years, and of course is in charge of the NSA and is boss to both George Norrie and Michael Aquino. So he brings on people like Stephen Quayle and Whitley Strieber. Stephen Quayle tells you shit about the Ice Reich. Whitley Strieber tells you shit about the aliens, that all the Chochoa, this minority group of hominoids who are very geared at psychic attack, are now presented as extraterrestrials, so you think you're having the alien experience, because all you Americans think all Asians are aliens. So all of this is, of course, part of an ongoing phenomenon that we will get into now. If you take a look at those links, here's the importance of them. First, we've got Justin White, who's wrote a poem about the Chochoa, about his feeling of the night hag experience, as it's called in America, the choking, the lack of breath, how he overcame that with his knowledge that I provided to contextualize his experience, which helps immensely. When you know what's happening to you, you are light years ahead of the game than if you were ignorant of what is happening to you. And of course, he's got that inner sights link. Now that goes directly to Feet to the Fire. So we've got that screenshot. Now, what do you see on that screenshot? Oh, here's where James Arthur Yanchik comes in, and this all connects with a lot of phenomena that's been going on lately with pedophilia and child molestation, and James Arthur Yanchik. Now, I've talked before about how James Arthur Yanchik was interviewing me for months. We probably worked together for, I'd say about a year, a little over a year, maybe 2 years, who knows. But he's got a lot of videos up on Facebook about myself, YouTube. So if you go to YouTube and you check out Feet to the Fire, Douglas Dietrich, you're going to find all these YouTube things about myself. And what is it that you don't find? You don't find this Chocho interview. It is something that we are going to put up on our own YouTube channel with Jonathan Warrington. So a big shout out to Jonathan Warrington. John Warrington is the Maggot Man, and we're going to take this and upload it onto John Warrington's Maggot Man channel, and we're going to have people check that out there. We're going to put these links up on my Facebook timeline as well, but it'll be uploaded through John Warrington, and this will provide some more controversy to hit the Jonathan Warrington channel on YouTube, which of course already is suffering all kinds of controversy in a positive sense. And so we've got this interview that James Arthur Yanchik hid. And why? Because it talked about a reason that people's personal space is invaded. But what's not hidden is when you look at that screenshot and you see directly above me is someone whose face he placed above every single one of his guests for years and years until the guy was busted for pedophilia. And that's a guy who's initials spell out appropriately enough, SAD, S-A-D, Sterling Allen David. So we're going to dump 3 more links into the chat room now, and these are 3 Veterans Today links about the Utah pedophile, how Scalia was murdered, and these scam cults of free energy, and all centered around this sick pedophilia from Utah, this pedophile, and this pederast pornographer was named Sterling Alan, David. He gave himself 3 names. This is what they all do. So many of these child molesters do that. And that brings us back to the Presidio military base experience and all those child molesters. Now, in terms of the Presidio military base experience and all the chomos, or child molesters, they all worked through Task Force Delta. Now, Task Force Delta was definitively an official organization. The members communicated using an Army computer network called DeltaNet. This existed before there was DARPANet. And DeltaNet was the official designator of the United States Army Delta Force Computer Conference and Electronic Mail Network. It had over 1,000 members that I personally knew were listed at the Presidio military base. And they called themselves the Tribe. And the Tribe, of course, was part of NATO, which, of course, encompasses all the Western European nations, but its headquarters is in Brussels, Belgium, and it's in the lowland countries of Luxembourg and the Brussels area. You've got Belgium, you've got Nederland, and these are the shitholes that are the center focus of world pedophilia. This is where pedophilia is a national pastime. It is legal for all intents and purposes. You can screw kids from all over the world and put it on camera, and everybody thinks it's great. Now, that is where the headquarters of NATO is, and that is how this became a network for pederast pornography. And all of these people who were members of it all used 3 first names. I personally knew for years, because I had to work with him under various circumstances at the Presidio military base, a Lionel Allen Curtis, a U.S. Army Ranger sniper who was a convicted child molester. Just like Johnny Stebbins, who starred in Black Hawk Down, only they changed his name to Danny Grimes. Now, most of these people use 3 first names like Lionel Allen Curtis. You could transpose any of those names, and that's what you'll find with Sterling Allen David. You're going to find out that if you look him up on the National Pedophile Tracking System, CLETS, Criminal Law Enforcement Tracking System, or NCIC, the National Criminal Inventory Catalog, any one of these systems that monitor these chomos, you're going to find sometimes he's called David Sterling Allen. So he'll change it around. That's because they can always give the kids 3 first names. That makes it impossible to find them because they don't use normal surnames. It's always 3 first name combinations. Lionel Allen Curtis, Sterling Allen David, and then you can change it around, switch it, and you can tell all the kids a different first name every time. That's what they use. So you've got these clowns. Now, what was he doing with James Arthur Yanchik? Well, he was over there talking about free energy, so James Arthur Yanchik could incorporate him as a pedophile into every interview he's ever conducted. So if you go through the Feet to the Fire archives, any guest that James Arthur Yanchik has in his files, go look now. Take as many screenshots as you want, no matter who his guests are, whether they're Dr. Rita Louise, whether they're Douglas Dietrich, whether they're anyone else. Every guest he's ever had has the face of Sterling Allen David, this convicted child molester, on top of them. And not only is his face on top of them for every audio file he's brought on to every show, James Arthur Yanchik made sure to interrupt every single interview. And now we're going to bring 10 minutes in the middle of this interview for a catch-up on free energy with my good friend Sterling Allen David. Then he'd bring on the chomo, so everybody becomes implemented in their names with this chomo. Now, where was he going to go? Because there's no extradition policy with the United States. Where did Sterling Allen David attempt to escape? Russia! He was going to go to Russia, where there is no extradition to the United States and where the majority of a lot of child pornography comes from today. Now, why does it come from Russia? Because they lost the war. They lost the war, so their quality of life was totally shut down. That's why everybody was drinking. They had an economy that had no basis because there was nobody to plunder. And that's why, as soon as the Soviet Union collapsed and they were unable to hide all of their problems, they had the rate of annual population lost that was more than double the rate of loss during the period of Stalinist repression and mass famine in the first half of the 1930s. There was nothing like it in the 1,000-year history of Russia. And these are the people who tell you they won the war. And this is the ones that the Americans say are the giant Russian colossus. I mean, you've got an incredible disconnect from reality here. You might talk about, oh, look at the age wave in Japan. Look at the age wave in Germany. And take a look at the population. You've got 124 million people on the Japanese islands. 124 million people. Now, Russia's the largest nation in the world, even with all of its breakaway republics disconnected from it. Kazakhstan and all the rest of them, all these breakaway republics, all these like Quebecs. It's like a Canada with 17 Quebecs. All of these Quebecs broke off, and suddenly Russia's alone. It's still geographically the largest nation in the world. What's its population? 124 million people. It's got as many people as Japan. And so that's because they lost the war. Their asses were kicked. Their population dropped. No matter what you say about Japanese population drop and age wave, German population drop and age wave, whatever you've got going on, the rest of the developed world, Canada, North America included, nothing beats Russia in terms of its inexorable population crash. You've got the Soviet Union, when Mikhail Gorbachev was in charge, before he defected to the United States and set up shop in the former Coast Guard offices on site the Presidio military base. Before he moved to Presidio, Mikhail Gorbachev basically was running the Soviet Union in the 1980s. And the deaths of young fathers due to alcoholism had become such a common social phenomena that it was the major cause of the rapid decline of the lifespan of the average Russian male. And under Mikhail Gorbachev, the Soviet Union was the only country to be conducting research into infant retardation due to intoxication of the father at the moment of conception. And it was the only country that needed to. What does this tell you? It tells you that the Russian screws only when they're drunk. And, of course, this was because no one wanted to procreate because they couldn't afford the kids. So the only time they were procreating was when it was a mistake. And all of this resulted in an enormous population decline. And you've got this horrible situation where what do you do when you've got all of these people suffering such immense poverty, when you've got basically this incredible decline in population, where you've got all kinds of kids on drugs. The drug problem is just incredible. You've got 20% of the youngsters that the government is willingly open to admitting are on drugs. 20% of the youth population. That's all that they officially admit to. So we know it's higher than that. And, of course, you've got about 700,000 people dying of alcoholism or alcohol-related causes every year. You got 35,000 that die in road collisions annually, and they've got to be playing chicken. Literally, they have to be playing head-on-head collision, Russian roulette, because there's no traffic. There's no discernible traffic in any of the cities. So you've got the number of street children, none of whom are orphans. Street children who are not orphans, mind you, but they live on the streets, is over 700,000. That's why the child pornographers love Russia. So all these kids screw on camera. And that's why when you go on the net and you're cruising for porn, even casually, you're going to find out that all these kid sites come up and they're all Russian. So the pedophiles all run there because they can't be extradited. So you've got this Utah pedophile who openly admitted he was going to escape to Russia where he could be extradited. He viewed himself as an Edward Snowden. And then, of course, his ally Scalia got murdered. He got busted. And then, of course, we have this situation in Russia where, of course, you've got this massive mafia involving child pornography. So what happens? Oh, suddenly I'm attacked on YouTube when our good friend Daniel Arola puts up the John Warrington video with a cut straight to the kill scene where Richard Dolan is attacking myself. So when Richard Dolan attacks myself and I hand him his ass on a platter, if someone wants to watch the total video of that, they get basically a kind of, long-winded swamp they've got to slog through. So Daniel Arola took out the kill scene and he put it on YouTube. And he references people to the full video on the John Warrington channel if they want to see the full video and suffer through that. But the kill scene of myself with killing Richard Dolan's career appears on YouTube, and it's already gotten attacked by the Russian pederast porn mafia. So what happens was some clown named John Guifoyle, who was following me on Facebook for years. We're going to dump 2 screenshots into the chat room now. One of John Guifoyle as a clown taking a bow to me saying how great I am. He was following me for years. Finally decided he was going to become a Facebook friend. And then we've got this Roman Yakim. And so who is this clown? And exactly what is he talking about? What is going on with this individual? So we've got an individual who basically starts attacking me on Facebook in an ad hominem attack on YouTube, excuse me. This is all YouTube drama. And it is, of course, quite professionally important because it brings us to what I expose and have been exposing for quite some period of time. And basically, this was obviously cooperated not launched in cooperation between Guifoyle and this Raymond fool. And this guy's name is spelled R-O-M-A-M. Yakin is his surname, Yakhin. Now, there's no such name. So basically, you've got this situation where John Guifoyle says, a blatant and condescending tone from Dolan. He's entering a commentary under this Dietrich Destroys Dolan video on YouTube. And that was published by our good friend Daniel Arola under the name of the Taboo Brothers. So if you take a look at John Guifoyle, he's saying, that's so sad that, Dolan was foolish in trying to match which with a man who is faster thinking than himself by a margin indeterminable in his honest opinion. And then Roman Yakin comes out of nowhere, complete with a photo that, of course, can't speak any English because he's from Kazakhstan, the same culture that gave us Borat, the same culture, which you can look up on National Geographic, abducts its brides. You can look up a National Geographic special on Kazakhstan. They're Turkic peoples, and they write in the Cyrillic alphabet because they were absorbed into first the Tsarist Empire and then absorbed by the Soviet Union. So they use the Russian alphabet of Cyrillica, the Cyrillic alphabet. And so you've got this idiot who says Douglas, he can't spell Douglas, he's spelling in phonetic English, is absolutely brilliant, but I don't think he's reasonable about World War II history. Unfortunately, it makes people question everything else he says, and he has a lot of important information. Then John Guifoyle says, I understand what you're saying, point well taken. And then Roman Yakin says, I like Douglas too, but the guy is crazy, very smart and well-spoken, but crazy. Now, this is an ad hominem attack. There's absolutely no evidence for what he's saying, and he certainly doesn't back it up with any examples because he has nothing to say. But why is this individual attacking myself from Kazakhstan? Because it turns out that there's a huge Kazakhstan community of emigres in Texas. And again, these are people who came here to abduct brides. That is the big thing. Don't believe me? Look up Kazakhstan bride abduction on National Geographic. There's an entire bride abduction industry, mostly child brides. And so when I looked up Roman Yakin, I found out no one is spelled that way. Anyone from that part of the nation spells their name Roman, if they've got that first name, R-O-M-A-N, and the surname Yakin. And that unleashes a bunch of links to their community in Texas. But when I looked up back in the former Soviet Union, in Central Eurasia, in the Republic of Kazakhstan, Roman Yakin, as spelled with that M instead of the N at the end, it was purposefully misspelled so that it could be a distinctive pseudonym for a child porn site. So it went to a child porn site that was, when I looked it up in the Cyrillica, the Cyrillic, the Russian alphabet, it went direct to a child porn site that was so virulent, I had to push a Control-Alt-Delete to log out and get out of there so it wouldn't hijack my computer. That is what Roman Yakin is into. We're going to talk about why and why the Russian pedophiles are suddenly attacking Douglas Dietrich when we get back. Stay with us.
You're listening to Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com, 100% listener-supported radio, and now we return you to your host.
Okay, I want to remind people that Revolutions Radio on freedomslips.com is the largest listener-supported station on the internet. The key word here is listener-supported. You, the listener, keep us on the air. It's the second quarter of 2016, a new month, and it's time to show up and help us pay our bills so that we can continue to serve you. First and foremost, Mike Ringley, the proprietor of Revolution Radio, a.k.a. the Nighthawk, is trying to get the station a little less grid-dependent for obvious reasons. If you have been noticing, the local grid and national grid have been hinky for many months. Hinky is a technical vernacular term, a colloquial term for failure prone. Hawk has built a UPS inverter. It is a hybrid grid tie system from hand, and it still needs to raise a few bucks for a 120 amp hour battery so we can keep the station hot and burning through the bandwidth for up to 8 hours with no power from the grid if necessary. If you can assist, please visit the support page and put batteries in the PayPal notes to the seller on your donation, especially if you are a host or hostess with Revolution Radio. Now, for this show only, we are offering handmade canvas tote bags for any $150 donation. For $50, you will get a hand embroidered tote bag that has the Revolution Radio logo on it. Certain to get you searched at airports, but it's definitely a mark of honor for anyone who is hip. Now, I do want to remind people this is going to take 4 to 6 weeks for delivery, but stop by our website at freedomslips.com and click on the support tab to view it with many of the other fine options that we offer for yourself to express your support if the wait for the tote bag is too long. But we're going to keep pushing that because I think this is an important way to create a community spirit. Now, of course, consider subscribing to Freedom's Lips Radio Archives at less than $5 a month, precisely $4.95 monthly. Sign up at the bottom of the archives page, and also check out our 2014 and 2015 archived DVDs. Check out the DVD sales page at www.freedomslips.com/2014 to get an entire year of your favorite show on DVD format delivered straight to your door. Your favorite show, an entire year's broadcast, every guest, every caller, as close as your DVD player. Simply select your favorite show, your program now, not the host or hostess you're attempting to support, from the 2014 or 2015 broadcast year from the drop-down list, and click Buy Now to check it out with PayPal, and your favorite show on DVD will be en route for only $34.95. That's $39.95 outside the continental United States. Email Mike Ringley, the proprietor of Revolution Radio, at the following electronic address: nighthawk@freedomslips.com. Once again, that's nighthawk@freedomslips.com. Email him your PayPal receipt, your show choices, and your physical mailing address. This is a physical object. We're going to need that. Or if not your residential address, we're going to need some physical mailing address, such as a post office box, if you're trying to maintain anonymity. Nevertheless, remember that it takes a number of these orders to coalesce or accumulate before Mike Ringley considers it worth his time to personally deliver it to you from his mail drop box at the post office in Louisville, Kentucky. So the way to get it immediately is to order the 6-pack. That'll also get you a free 1-year access to Revolution Radio Archives. So what you would do is select the 6-packs of both Critical Omissions and, of course, the Saturday Night Firing Lines. There's only 3 transmission years for each of those separate programs, so it would equal a 6-pack. So you would order Critical Omissions and Saturday Night Firing Lines for the year 2015, the transmission year of 2014, and the broadcast year of 2013. And that will be 6, and that is going to cost $39.95 each outside of the continental United States, but less than $40 here inside the United States. $34.95 to be specific. About $35. They're about $40 if you're outside of the U.S. So, you would multiply that, of course, by 6. And you would, of course, contact Mike Ringley
at the following address, nighthawk@freedomslips.com, to inform him of your choice of the six-pack. Now, just remember that way it would justify automatically being mailed immediately. You would get 365 days free access to the audio archives for all the hosts and hostesses on Revolution Radio, a world of information at your fingertips, and you could play it 24 hours a day at your convenience, and of course, you wouldn't have the inconvenience of having to resub on a monthly basis. Also, we're kept on air by leather-shop.biz, so visit www.leather-shop.biz for your customized leatherware, any style, any size, any color, any fetish. They love freedomslips.com. And your promotional code for a $250 discount on your order is my own lowercase initials and the current numeric designate for the present year. In other words, DD2016. Once again, that promotional code to get $25 off on your customized leatherware or gear is lowercase dd 2016. Sign up this 2016 for the time travel webinar from last year's experience. Andrew Bartzies, Douglas Dietrich, Peter Moon, and Laura Lee Solomon are four unique personalities offering their perspectives on time travel and magic and how these two dynamic subjects have intertwined in the past, what role they might play in the future. All of us as participants have broken new ground in the course of this 4+ hour event. It's a webinar valued at $37, but is available to you, the listener of this transmission, at a discount price of $27. As a bonus, you'll receive the introductory and first video of Peter Moon's new video series entitled Time Travel Theory Explained. So go ahead and visit www.galacticnewsnetwork.com. Once again, that's www.galacticnewsnetwork.com for details. My own sponsor, Ben Estenius, all-around man about town, single man who's a sprint car racer, looking for a sponsor of his own in that happy sport, dangerous would be a better term, is, of course, someone who is used to danger, not afraid of facing it. That's why he's my sponsor. And he's now guiding the Tucson Murders True Crime Tours. These Tucson Murders True Crime Tours provide historic crime investigation into forgotten lost crimes in Tucson, Arizona. They're small private tours hosted by a true crime researcher and an enthusiast, and will take you to real historic crime locations related to these crimes in Tucson, relive these events, and hear the untold stories behind the stories. This season, see the Pied Piper of Tucson tour, crimes that shocked the Southwest in the 1960s, the very decade I entered this vale of tears, and these devastating crimes stained a city so deeply it may never be removed. For tour information, contact the TucsonMurders.com, Tucson spelled Tucson, Tucson, or phone Ben Estenius directly on his cell phone, 520 area code 323-3406. Once again, that's 1-520/323-3406. We have, of course, my own DVD presentation, Satan's Crusaders, and both versions of Roswell and the Rising Sun, now available as DVDs at $30 each, or in downloadable format for $15 each, or both formats for the same presentation at $40. See the new website at www.dddietrich.com. And when you're at dddietrich.com, PayPal to lsolomon1@rgv.rr.com. I'm going to spell that for you. My executrix producer, if you want to become a sponsor, contact her through the same electronic address. It's spelled LSOLOMON numeric 1 @RGV for Rio Grande Valley .RR for Roadrunner Service.com. Specify the email address where we can send you your links and your choice of presentation. No additional shipping charges apply in the continental United States. And please remember that, like Revolution Radio itself and Mike Ringley, we do not have an automated download system. Your email must be seen and responded to by an actual human being. So you must allow at least half a day, we're speaking 12 hours, if you're pedantic about it, for that to take place. And, of course, Mona Lee McRae is our webmistress for DDDietrich.com. She's a regular contributor and correspondent with the Firing Lines and Critical Omissions. Her music is always top 10 on Reverb Nation's regional charts. Stop by her YouTube channel at The Mona Hawk and her website at www.monalee.com. Mona Lee is spelled MONALEIGH.com, where you can purchase some of her music. By the way, a note on those tote bags. People are asking about the Revolution Radio tote bags. The deal is United States only. $75 for outside of the United States. So half $100 donation, specify tote bags. You'll get that embroidered in the United States. If you're outside of the United States, it'll be $750 of $100, 75 bucks. And so thank you for your patience with all of that. We're going to return now towards our butt ugly subject, which is, of course, pedophilia, all these clowns like John Guilfoyle, who in the screenshot you could see has got a clown bowing appropriately enough. Now, this clown also had, just bizarrely, for years and years, while he was following myself on Facebook, his icon was a picture of Malcolm X getting an autograph from Muhammad Ali, who was also an African-American Muslim. Both of these men were outstanding African-American Muslims and quite famous. And so he always tried to portray himself as black, even though he's quite white. And so this milquetoast, as we used to call him back in the hood, this milquetoast, this milk white individual, basically was like obsequious wherever he went. But it's a lot like voting. When you have all of these people who say, I'm going to vote for whomever, everything they say is, for all intents and purposes, like passing gas. It has been statistically proven that your average American does not decide who they're going to vote for definitively until the moment they enter that voting booth, or at least several minutes beforehand. And about that time, when they've made the commitment to actually take the time and the trouble to enter a voting booth, then they will suddenly decide, and it'll always be for the most insane and insipid of reasons. I voted, they will tell you, for Ronald Reagan because he was in a lot of movies. I voted for Bill Clinton because he played the saxophone and I saw him on TV and I thought that was cool. And, whatever choice they give you, it will always be the stupidest, most irrational reason. And it will be the swaying of their brain at the absolute last moment by the last bit of trivial imagery that entered their head. Most of it based on the Schwarzenegger syndrome, who became governor of California simply because he starred in a lot of movies. If Sylvester Stallone had run for president, he would have been on the presidential, shall we say, list of historical figures. You would have your list of presidents, and Sly Stallone would have been among them, simply because all of you had seen him from the Lords of Flatbush through Rambo, and said, oh gosh, yeah, oh, okay, I'll vote for him. That's all it takes. So John Guilfoyle, whose name, by the way, is an anagram. It's a real name. His name is actually a real name. And it's spelled very strangely, like a Guiuifole, something like that. It's on the screenshot. But you've got this Guilfoyle was an anagram that was used by one of the most racist, homosexual pedophiles in the history of mankind, Alfred Bester, who's considered the godfather of American science fiction. He wrote a story called The Star's My Destination about a character called Gully Foyle, which is an anagram for the Guilfoyle name. And he later on, just before he mercifully died, mercifully for the rest of humanity, this idiot wrote a novel called The Deceivers. Now, your average white American who reads The Deceivers is going to be offended by what they read in that book, The Deceivers. That's the last work he ever published. And of course, he was en route to a science fiction convention where he was going to be honored with innumerable awards, which unfortunately they gave him anyway, because science fiction is all in America, is all about racism and stupidity and ignorance. And so they take the most racist people, such as the author of the Lensman series and the Gray Lensman, etc. I'll have, of course, my Executrix producer look his name up. His name escapes me at the moment, who was the first man who came up. Now, remember, young lady, he was Skylark of Space. He's also the author of that. You can look up those titles. When it's Skylark of Space, Gray Lensman, you'll find the dude's name. This individual was the first person with the Lensman series to advocate total annihilation or extermination of races considered to be genetically evil, that they were incapable of producing any good or acting on any good in the world. Functionally like the Americans, who we can't go down that road because the Americans are not a race. They're just a hodgepodge, a morass of European degenerates who came to the United States. The effect, unfortunately, has been the same. Oh, there we are. My Executrix producer's got his name up for me. Edward Doc Smith. Yes, supposedly a chemist. It turned out he was, of course, he was a mixer for various synthetic chemical sugars and crusts and powders at a donut factory. So he called himself Doctor as a chemist. And Doc Smith wrote all these incredibly racist novels about the extermination of various alien races. Exactly what, of course, L. Ron Hubbard, the father of Scientology, recommended for any encounters we might have with alien races, was to exterminate them all in a Christopher Columbus. There goes a genocidal Jew for you, if ever there was one. And Christopher Columbus was a Jew known as a Marrano, which, of course, appropriately enough, translates from the Espanol as dirty pig. That meant Jews who hid their Jewishness as Spaniards to prevent their execution or genocide in the Inquisition, the Spanish Inquisition. And of course, he came over to the United States and launched the most massive genocide in the history of humanity against the Native American peoples to establish a new Zion for his fellow Jews, the Colombian genocide, which of course slaughtered well over 100 million people and changed the climate of the earth itself. Quite literally. I've gone into this before on record. We'll happily do so again in the future. We'll be forced to do so, come Columbus Day or such points. And so we've got this kind of policy that was supposed to extend to space as recommended by Doc Smith, who said to do that with other nations on Earth, specifically the combined axis of nations, the Germans and the Japanese in particular. And of course, we have, following that tradition, people like Alfred Bester. So in Alfred Bester's book, The Deceivers, he actually, now keep in mind, this book was published just before he died. This was published in the late 1980s. We're talking about the early 90s. It's still in circulation today. And so we got something published in the late 1980s in which he is referring to Asians as gooks and calling the Japs and the Chinks a combined race of Jinks, 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 which is an acronym for Jap Chinks. So he's using these terms in a book that's published in the late 80s, in which, of course, his sexual fantasy at the end of the book is that an intelligent group of Asian men who are highly powerful in Asian society are captured by his super muscular man-meat beefcake hero and tortured to death and humiliated sexually, in which they're all dressed up as circus animals and forced to perform in a circus where they're all whipped into submission, and then he forces them into various forms of oral and anal copulation. This is published in the late 1980s. And for this, he was given this enormous award called the Godfather of American Science Fiction. This is you in the 90s, Americans, and you're telling me that you're some good group of people that aren't bitter about losing the war. Of course you're bitter about losing the war. That's why you have sick psychotic fantasies like this. That's why, of course, the Soviets. Now, what everybody says about the rebel question, whatever they say about the people in Dixie, where you will meet some very bitter people from the Deep South, which is loaded, of course, because it's an occupied nation with poverty, where you have a lot of pornographic actresses have Southern accents that they did throughout the 80s, many of them, because they came from this impoverished area. The pornography industry was a real viable option to break out of that poverty. You've got a lot of men down there who are trying to maintain identity while they're on welfare. These are white men. And you get this kind of attitude where I have met really bitter Southerners who say, when I ask them about the Confederate States of America, they'll say, oh, the Confederacy is dead and I'm glad to see it go. A bunch of rednecks living on a myth. Well, that's what you have with the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union is a collapsed, failed economy and empire state that existed only because of its support from Allied America. And you've got its collapse resulting in all of these bitter and literally drunken. I don't say that as a disparagement. That's what they do all day. They make Scots and Irish look like teetotalers. And so you've got this alcoholic culture of embittered people. And so when I get on air, expose the fact they lost the war just like you did over there in the Battle of Shamushu and the loss of all of whatever amphibious forces they could get together. If you look at the uniforms of the men at these various battles, you literally see them wearing life rafts, like life rings, like you throw to a child in a inflatable swimming pool. And these life rings were what they wore around them. That was their version of an amphibious invasion. Of course, they were doomed to be exterminated. They had no ability to carry out what the Americans were doing in terms of amphibious warfare across the Pacific. The end result was a catastrophic loss, which they claim as a major victory because of the blitz by old men wearing cavalry, riding cavalry into Manchuria, and which is all filmed and made a great propaganda victory. And of course, they all got annihilated in Korea, and somehow that gets covered up, just like the Americans. They'll tell you, oh, the Soviets stopped because we had two GIs. Now, by the way, there were no Americans in South Korea because South Korea was part of Japan. There's no Americans in South Korea at that time because the Americans didn't invade Japan. They never invaded the home islands of Japan, so there was no Americans in South Korea, who they claim stopped them at the DMZ line. They said they had two Americans there who flagged them down, and that's why the Soviets stopped. Because, you know, why wouldn't they, right? They wanted autographs. I mean, give me a break, right? This is the insanity. That's insanity. So when you people have this history presented to you, and it's absolute insanity, none of you question it. That's the true insanity. So this is why we've got that war loss bitterness, the bitterness of defeat that's coming from the Russian pay-to-ass porn mafia coming out of Kazakhstan through their mafia connection in Texas. And these people are putting their faces up, actually putting their photographs up. And of course, they're actually saying things like, oh, Douglas Dietrich's crazy. And that's all they have to say. They have nothing to say to counteract the reality or the historical expositions that I convey unto you. Now, of course, that brings us back to the other pedophiles that they cater to. Men like Sterling Allen David, who was promoted for years and forever until the day he was busted by James Arthur Yanchik. Now, this has to be put into some context because the same James Arthur Yanchik is the man I exposed before on the basis of his relationship to his girlfriend, who claims she was assaulted by Michael Aquino. So you've got this girlfriend of his, the functional equivalent of a common law marriage wife, who grew up in California. There's no denial of that. And we have this individual who, when she was very young, growing up near Fort Baker or Travis Airfield Base and all the rest of these different military bases, which her mother, who was a practicing Satanist, lived by for obvious reasons when I've explained earlier about DeltaNet and the military connections with NATO concerning child porn smuggling. So this mother's living near to all of these bases. And at one point, one of her many lovers, who she had a different one every other day, was apparently some kind of Roman Catholic, felt very concerned for the daughter, and threw holy water on herself. And her mother felt she was unable to go near her, so she called in the big guns, Michael Aquino, who threw her into a tub and scraped all of her epidermis off with a scouring pad. Now, all of this is something that was confessed by her to James Arthur Yanchik when he was working on uploading images concerning a video of mine, an interview with myself, where he was putting up images of Michael Aquino. He had never spoken of Michael Aquino to her in his life. When she walked in the door, she went into a meltdown, seeing the image of Michael Aquino, and then explained to James Arthur Yanchik exactly why she was so upset. And then he told it to me, and then he refused to talk about her on air. Now, this same woman was victimized by James Arthur Yanchik in a very different sense as well. When I said, you got to bring it up on air or this is going to continue, he says, oh, no, we're all getting threatening phone calls from Michael Aquino. So when Michael Aquino sent a letter threatening to sue myself through, of course, his bottom bitch, Lorian Ann Fenton, my former manageress, using her as the courier. I, of course, laughed in his face, and yet he presented the same threat to James Arthur Yanchik, and James Arthur Yanchik allowed him to post his own rebuttals to myself on his YouTube channel. So if you look up the YouTube channel link of Feet to the Fire, where I'm basically responding to Michael Aquino's demands for retractions. And this was proven to be a genuine email from Michael Aquino by the expert on email tracing, Ed Opperman, the private investigator, formerly a host at Revolution Radio. We have the situation in which James Arthur Yanchik allows the man who his functional equivalent of a common law marriage wife says assaulted her when she was young. He allows him to put up rebuttals against the man who's exposing him on his own YouTube channel. Now, that falls into position with his involvement with Sterling Allen David and his involvement with his neighbor, who is on the pedophile list as well, in his neighborhood with his common law marriage wife, his girlfriend. And this neighbor moved in, and I spoke about this on air before. Oh, yeah, James Arthur Yanchik said, I didn't bring up James Arthur Yanchik at the time, but I might as well say it's him now. He had this guy move into his neighborhood, and the guy has a girlfriend. All these people have enablers and abettors, people who cooperate to make the crimes possible and consistent. The guy was released from jail. This is the guy who I said that on the night of Halloween, the cops had to show up and put cars at both ends of the street so that the kids could come and trick or treat with his child molester, and he could leer at him and take selfies of himself with them, his face cuddling next to theirs, while the police watched to see if he made any sudden moves. And then they would arrest him. And I said to James Arthur Yanchik, well, they just slap him into jail for the night. Oh, no, that's a violation of his rights. Well, it turned out James Arthur Yanchik told me that one of the first things the guys did when he moved into the neighborhood was send a picture of himself with an erect phallus to his girlfriend in the neighborhood. And she said, oh, God. And she looked him up on the CLETS, Criminal Law Enforcement Tracking System, the same one that's got our boy Sterling Allen David on it. And she looked him up on the NCIC National Category, Criminal Investigation Catalog, all the rest of that inventory catalog, and saw him too. So she knew he was a convicted child molester. So she said, we got to tell our neighbors. And James Arthur Yanchik said, oh, no. He's a good man. And as a result, the guy lived in the neighborhood. The neighbors all found out he was a chomo because he bought a telescope, said he was looking at the stars, the planets, but he kept looking at all the other kids in all the other yards. So they either had to build safety fences surrounding their yards with such high fences they couldn't get any sunlight in the daytime, no sun for the kids, or they had to move. So the entire neighborhood had to change for James Arthur Yanchik's chomo friend who moved in. And, he says, oh, we can't talk again, so that'll be a lawsuit. How can someone sue you when they're on CLETS or NCIC? They can't sue you when you expose the fact they're a convicted child molester. Well, that's because he's aiding and abetting them, like his friend Sterling Allen David. And he's put another link up now that, of course, defends Sterling Allen David. And so that link will be dropped into the chat room to show you what, of course, James Arthur Yanchik and his friends are saying about Sterling Allen David, where they just say, oh, it's part of the free energy, prosecution. They're persecuting him because he's free energy and he would give us free energy. Well, that guy was on for year after year with James Arthur Yanchik, and he never has offered us any hint of functional free energy in half a century, half 100 years? We haven't gotten any free energy from this guy, but we got a lot of paider-ass porn that he was dumping onto people's websites, literally dumping onto people's websites. So what does all this have to do in relation to Aquino? You've got this is what was going on with myself, where James Arthur Yanchik says he's fighting child pornography, and yet he is one of the biggest supporters of child pornographers and pedophiles. Now, all of this is to the point where he allows the man who his girlfriend, his live-in wife, claims raped her or physically assaulted her in a way that's worse than rape, scraping off all her skin with a scouring pad, and he puts the man's defense up on his YouTube channel. This is all part of that alternative information media network that services these people. So let's go into the other ugly areas of this and how ugly it truly gets. We were talking about how that Romam changed the spelling of his name from Roman Yakin, surname spelled Y-A-K-H-A-N, or H-I-N, and he changed it to Romam, a single letter change, which made him the only person on planet Earth with his name spelled in that fashion. Now, this is a way to make it stand out distinctively to other child molesters who are looking for his child porn site. So the people who looked for it would find it by that particular spelling. Now, we go on to my own experience with this when I was known as the White Widow back in the days when I was young, and of course, out of necessity, had to dress as a transvestite to basically avoid all of what would otherwise become attempted male rape incidents by many men who were attracted to me because, of course, I was Asian, very effeminate looking, and was beautiful enough where, of course, I was a primary target. By dressing as a girl, the overwhelming majority of American men had no interest in myself. We're going to put a column into the chat room now about myself as the White Widow. And it talks about, of course, the various categories of sexuality. And, of course, it talks about pederast porn and the pedophiles who are working with the new frontier, a very dark frontier of robosexuality on the basis of artificially intelligent child robots. Now, we're going to put in another link as well on Shin Takagi. Shin Takagi is, of course, a Japanese name. And the person who is manufacturing in Japan lifelike child sex dolls has taken my face from my childhood and placed it as the feature face of many of these sex dolls. He got that from my military records with the Department of Defense back in the days when I was working with Aquino as the basis for his three-dimensional rendition, modeling, and sculpts that ultimately went on his robots. He changed the eye color, he changed the hair color, but he is using my face, which is considered by many Japanese to be the epitome of a noble face because I have a pronouncedly Caucasoid nose, which all the nobility of Japan had because the Japanese are the Caucasians of Asia. And in Japan, the pronounced Roman nose is far more, or rather a kind of eagle nose, an aquiline nose, is far more of a sign of nobility by genetic inheritance than almost any other feature. Now, you'll notice that in terms of the Shin Takagi link, in which we have the Japanese connection, because the Japanese are so far ahead in terms of technology since they won the war. That's one of the reasons why they won the war, than the Americans. This is where many of these sex dolls are produced for an American clientele. Many of them go to Miracle Village in Florida as an example, a kind of Potemkin village of child molesters. The community in Miracle Village in Florida is nothing but child molesters, including the cops, including the judges, including the doctors. That link to Miracle Village as a YouTube link will be going into our chat room right now as well. Now, all of this is connected through someone else who changed the spelling of their name, Pete Suzuki. Now, we got this guy named Pete Suzuki, whose name was brought up by Aquino multiple times as his link between Japan and the United States when it came to this technological exchange connection of artificially intelligent child robots that are shipped by the hundreds to places like Miracle Village. And Pete Suzuki spells his surname in the odd form of taking the Roman U, which is a V, in the original Latin language of Pax Romanum, or the Roman Empire. The V was the sound of U. So when you take a look at old records and you take a look at the Roman U, it's a V. So he changed all the U's in his Suzuki name to V. So he's the only person on all Earth whose Suzuki surname is spelled S-V-Z-V-K-I. Illegible to most people. It doesn't make any sense, but that's all part of that same encryption and encoding that is used, of course, by the guy I described from Kazakhstan, Roman Yakin. And so you've got this incredible, shall we say, expositional articulation of massive connections that are exposed by things as nuanced or as subtle as name spellings. And keep in mind that when I use the term Potemkin village, it's like propaganda village in North Korea. In North Korea, along the demilitarized zone, the North Koreans maintain what they call propaganda village, which is an ideal village where all the houses are freshly painted, everybody is healthy and well-fed, and that's to show the rest of the world that they're somehow all, functional. Now, it's all a joke. You go beyond that, behind that facade, behind the maskarada, as they say in Russia, the mask, the masquerade, the persona. And, of course, North Korea is a basket case. That is what this Miracle Village is of pedophiles in Florida. They've set up a functional village of pedophiles who are by nature dysfunctional, and they've got thousands of them living in where they're serving as police, judges, all these positions of authority. And of course, what they don't tell you is that there are hundreds of these so-called miracle villages all over the United States that were connected by the U.S. Army DeltaNet. And of course, the paider-ass porn that was dealt in by people like Roman Yakin, out of Kazakhstan's mafia, resettled into Texas, goes to places like this. And that's, of course, they were frequented as basically stop sites, arrest sites by Sterling Howard David as he traveled around the world, pushing free energy when he wasn't pushing his prick into any child's orifice he could grab. And all of this, of course, is the horror of your nation. Now, I, of course, am presenting this to you as someone who was part of the military, whose very face became the face of the majority of artificially intelligent child sex dolls that are coming out of Japan, as sculpted by Shin Takagi. According to Michael Aquino, through much of what was expedited by various other Japanese Americans who were running dogs, who didn't have the courage to leave and resettle back in homeland Japan after internment, their descendants, or who didn't move to Brazil after all their property was taken, and became incorporated, just like David Fry, the informant who turned in all the militiamen at that site in Oregon, that little bird post where they were all viewing nature for the United States government, you know, a bunch of park rangers with easy jobs until the militia took over. And then David Fry got into the government computers, complete with government encryption codes, no less, and told the public that they were all supporting Hitler and ISIS and got everybody alienated from them to the point where they could be turned in without a peep and spend the rest of their lives in jail, including Jason Patrick, who was here on this very show, as brought in, of course, by our correspondent from Oregon, Mona Lee McRae. And, of course, guys like George Takei, who survived the internment camps of World War II and who grows up and tells you he loves America. And, of course, who starred in a Twilight Zone episode called The Encounter, in which he claimed his father was a traitor who signaled in the planes at Pearl Harbor. A patent lie. There's never been a Japanese-American traitor, but there's a traitor, a race traitor, in the form of George Takei, who proved traitor to his race by making that anti-Japanese, what we call Japanophobic, propaganda piece under the auspice of that great racist, Rod Serling. Now, whoever says, oh, he wasn't a racist, he made these pro-Latin American, these pro-black things, that's like, you know, Mel Gibson. Mel Gibson, of course, had this black co-actor, Danny Glover, and he produces, of course, Lethal Weapon 2 or 3, in which he shows the Chinese mafia as all evil. The only good ones are the little China brat that you can take on as kind of like a short round kind of, we call them like mascots. And, when you've got somebody like that, this is a little kid, oh, then they're cute. But all the adult Asians, including, of course, great martial arts heroes, were just displayed or portrayed as absolute villains. So basically, they sing that song at the end of that Lethal Weapon movie with Mel Gibson and Danny Glover, where they're saying, why can't we be friends? And the whole message of the film is everybody's your friend except the chinks. You know, it's like that. You've got this very selective anti-Asian bias that is streaming through all of this American culture because there's not enough of an Asian population to protest it. And those few Asians that are left, like George Takei, are enforcing it. So the whole thing turns into a massive race hatred machine, which you're totally unconscious of. And with all of this going on, my articulating this to you brings us down to what we will talk about on Saturday night, which is the Chochoa, which is an Asian-sourced minority of what Asians perceive as non-human entities or dark fairy that have been shipped to the United States through, of course, the child trafficking industry. The war in Vietnam ended in April of 1975 when I had John Miranda on and I had, of course, Amanda Ute on. That was the 41st Memorial Day event concerning the fall of Saigon. And when the North Vietnamese army invaded that very month, the Presidio military base became the destination for over 1,300 tiny refugees from Vietnam, literally infants, fresh out of the womb. officially known as Operation SPOVO, Support of Vietnamese Orphans, but it was popularly known as Operation Baby Lift. It airlifted infants and toddlers by World Airways to California. This was done at the request of American voluntary agencies arranging for the adoptions of the Vietnamese babies. But the 6th United States Army, headquartered at the Presidio military base, arranged to house and feed the children at Harmon Hall Reserve Center until permanent accommodations could be provided for each child. So we had Army and civilian volunteers that turned the drill hall into a nursery. They spread mattresses out on the floor so the children wouldn't roll off and literally injure themselves. That's how frail and small they were. They had sheets, pillows, blankets, baby and medical supplies. Units stationed at the Presidio responded by providing doctors, nurses from Letterman Army Medical Center, cooks, drivers, security. 24-hour shifts were not uncommon. And basically, we had this huge gymnasium-like facility, and the last babies to be processed departed the Presidio in May, literally within a month. So the United States Army played the role of adoption pimp and turned out all these baby infants to whoever wanted them, literally sold them in a number of cases. And we're talking about the 1,300 cases that made it on record. And what was the destination of many of these children? We don't know. That is part of the point. Many of them disappeared out of history. And no more were coming, none of whom were normal, none of whom were human, because suddenly a plane carrying many of these babies, hundreds of them, exploded in midair when taken off from Saigon. That was a United States Air Force cargo jet, not a civilian jet like the ones that I mentioned involved with SPOVO. And this United States Air Force cargo jet had 243 babies that they put in shoe boxes. They punched holes in the lid like they were salamanders or pet snakes or little kittens. And they put all these shoe boxes with holes in their lids on this plane. And they had 30 nurses, teachers, all female, 40 as a matter of fact, 38 altogether that were military and civilian. And they all went down when that plane exploded over Saigon on takeoff, killing hundreds of children, and it rained babies from the sky and burning women. And some of the pilots, too, also died, obviously. And at that point, suddenly the CIA stepped in and said, oh, hey, terrible tragedy, that terrorism. We've got all these other children that we have to bring to the United States because they're like deformed and ugly. They got Mongoloid syndrome and Methuselah syndrome, and they'll be killed by the communists because the communists will view them as the degenerate offspring of American rapists. So they imported 40,000 of these Chochoa to the United States. And everybody thought they were really ugly, retarded kids. And they wound up all over North America, Canada, United States. But the overwhelming majority of them, of course, dominate a great deal of very specific crimes in San Francisco. Now, we're headed towards the end of this program, but I'm going to read a little something from, of course, our good friend, Alira Walker. And we have, of course, our other good friend, Justin White. And Justin White wrote a poem, the text of which we've already put into the chat room. Alira Walker gives us a personal observation. And Alira Walker's personal observation is as follows. She is, of course, the person who organizes the afterlife in the Gulf of Mexico and knows more about the British petroleum oil disaster than almost anyone else on earth. So do visit the afterlife in the Gulf of Mexico and make yourself a member on Facebook. It's a Facebook timeline. Make certain that you put as many likes as you can on all of her posts, review them, and great shout out to a lovely individual. Now, this is what she has to say. I would like to thank Douglas for his fascinating work. I find his way of presenting information so delightful. I've been listening to old episodes. I was not familiar with the Chochoa before hearing him speak about it. I think I may have seen one in San Francisco. I once lived for over 2 years in a warehouse at 6th and Natoma. It's a very ghetto-oriented area in San Francisco. In fact, the majority of San Francisco is ghetto. Of all the wretched, evil, ghastly, disgusting, and truly despicable horrors that I saw on a daily basis, this is from a literal walker, there was one creature I could not tolerate. Just the sight of it made me want to leave the planet rather than stay on a planet that had such a vile monster on it. Besides that, it's hard to describe its features. It was very small, but not a midget, around 4 feet, incredibly withered / scrawny. I don't think it was bald, but I don't remember its features very clearly anymore. That was many years ago. The memorable thing about it was my instinctive urge to kill it. I was actually offended that such a thing had been allowed to live for so many days. I do recall it would associate with other small men who were obviously Southeast Asian. The thing was, they were human, and this thing was not. You spoke of these things in the underworld, quote unquote, of SF, San Francisco, involved with drugs and gangs and such. That was not the impression I had of this tiny demon. It was completely feral. I can't imagine it having money or buying things. It was always messing with things in the street. It was obsessed with building altars of worship on light posts, stop signs, any fixture in the street. I would tie things to the light post. It would tie things to the light post, kneel before it, and pray, babbling terrible things to it. There was lots of banging and clanging. And finally, one day I saw it had removed the huge manhole cover from the middle of the intersection at the corner of my block of Natoma Street, and it was living under there, inside the ground, under the street. I would see it walking around with tiny trees it had ripped out of the ground, very small trees. It would have one slung over its shoulder and would prance around as if on parade, displaying the tiny dead tree so proudly. I saw this quite a few times. The awful thing about it was the expression of total demonic glee, the shining eyes and huge, terrible grin as it would carry a baby dead tree dangling its little roots that it had just ripped out of the ground. I was working as an environmentalist, campaigning to save trees, as I did for over a decade. So for me, this was more than just a little disturbing. There was only one living thing on my block of Natoma Street, a very small tree. I would hang out next to it and smoke cigarettes, as I was not allowed to inside. It was next to the wall with the dragonfly mural. When the mural would be tagged or damaged, I would go to touch it up and repaint it. I bet the mural is still there. One night, I saw the little tree was gone. I knew that monster had killed it. I was so mad, I couldn't get over it. I was effing furious. I really wanted to slay that foul mutant thing. I had a few beers and was still mad and not paying attention to myself. I slipped and fell out of my loft, landing on concrete and busted my hip. It took me about a year to heal from that injury. I always felt it wasn't just that I wasn't paying attention. It was as if the evil I was focused on had somehow made me fall. I never knew what it was until I heard Douglas speak of the Chochoa. I think what I saw was one of their cousins / descendants in the quote unquote underworld of San Francisco, living under the street, killing quote unquote baby trees. My question for Douglas is this: if that creature was a Chochoa, how did the CIA manage to do anything with them? I don't understand how they convinced 40,000 of them to relocate to the States. Was it at gunpoint? Were they taken at force? How were they able to control them out of captivity? If it wasn't by force, how did the CIA get them to leave their homeland? I cannot begin to imagine such feral things working in black projects. I mean, if they had any power, couldn't they escape the CIA? How could the CIA even communicate with them to the point of explaining black projects to them? What incentive could such monsters gain from agreeing to terrorize people such as Whitley Strieber? I realize that looks like many questions. I know many people have questions for Douglas. He has so many great insights to share. I hope he is doing all right and has an okay day. Smile emoticon. Thanks. And this was delivered via an email to my former managers, Lorian Ann Fenton, who never forwarded it to myself, under her direct orders from Aquino to keep it from me. I later on got it directly from Illyra Walker herself years later. Now, of course, that brings us to what other people have said, and there's a few links that we didn't put into the chat room. One of them is on the Ice Reich. So I am going to ask that Ice Reich link be dumped into the chat room now by my Executrix producer, Laura Lee Solomon, because that provides us also with a different response to this very pertinent series of questions. So I'm going to turn now my attention towards that in the last few minutes. I want people to know that other link we put in about persecuting or prosecuting Sterling Allen David, it's by himself bitching about a free energy cult not happy with him. So don't think that that's anything of relevance, as it's just, Sterling David trying to defend himself. Well, we're here at the end of the program. I'm going to bring up some answers from the Ice Reich link directly pertinent to the Chochoa, written by a person from Southeast Asia on Saturday, and that'll launch us into 2 hours speaking about the Chochoa phenomena. And thank you very much for your patience with us tonight. And Saturday, we'll speak more about artificial intelligence and the robosexuality and some of my collateral against the United States government as pertinent to my being a public informant at personal risk. Have a good weekend. Join us on a good week. Join us on Saturday.
Thank you for listening to Revolution Radio.